My mother left a box under her bed. I found it 12 days after she died, when my aunt and I had been working through the house in the specific form that the clearing of a parent's house requires, the careful attention to what is there, the asking of each object what it was and what it had been to the person who had kept it. The box had been a shoebox, the specific kind that has been repurposed into the storage form, with a piece of tape on the lid and my name written on the tape in my mother's handwriting. I had taken the lid off. Inside there had been 35 sealed envelopes, each one labeled on the front with a number. 1, 2, 3 through 35. On the back of each envelope there had been a year, 1991, 1992, 1993, through 2025, the year of her death. I had been 35 years old. There had been 35 envelopes. There had been one for every year of my life. I had sat on the floor of her bedroom with the shoebox in my lap and had understood what I was holding. She had written one letter per year on my birthday. I had been born in March, and the years written on the backs of the envelopes had been in the format that told me she had written them in the March of each year. She had been writing these letters since I had been born. She had been writing them my whole life and had been keeping them under her bed and had never told me. I had picked up the envelope labeled 1 with 1991 written on the back. It had been sealed. I had put it down. I had sat on the floor with the box for a long time before I had moved. I am an archivist. I have been working for 9 years at the Maryland State Archives in Annapolis, where I work on the processing and description of historical collections, the specific work of taking the unprocessed materials that arrive at the archives in boxes and bags and filing cabinets and organizing them into the form that researchers can use and understand. The work requires the specific form of the attention to what is there, the reading of the materials in the context of the whole collection, the understanding of how the individual item relates to the full record, the building of the finding aid that allows someone who has never seen the collection to understand what it contains and how to navigate it. I had been doing this work for 9 years. My mother had left me a collection. The collection had been organized. The finding aid had been the shoebox and the numbered envelopes and the years on the backs. The archivist in me had understood the system immediately. The daughter in me had sat on the floor for a long time. I want to say something about my mother and about who she had been and about what I had known of her and what I had not known until the shoebox. Her name was Louise. She had died in February at the age of 67 from the specific combination of the conditions that had been accumulating across her 60s. She had been a middle school science teacher for 30 years in Baltimore, which had been the form of her professional life. The student who did not yet understand science, the patient teaching of the understanding, the specific form of the love for the curious mind that the good science teacher has. She had been, in the form I had known her across 35 years, the warm and organized parent, the parent who maintained the schedules, who had been present at the occasions, who had expressed the love in the form of the organized presence, rather than the performed form. She had been good at organizing things. She had organized the letters under her bed for 35 years. The organization had been her form. The letters had been the content the form was holding. Before I go on, if something in this story is landing close to something real in your life, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely feel it. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. My name is Simone. I am 35 years old. I am an archivist at the Maryland State Archives in Annapolis, and this is the story of the shoebox, and the 35 letters and what they contained and what reading them in order has given me, and what I understand now about my mother in the full form of who she was. I want to say something about the decision I had made in the first days after finding the shoebox, and about why I had made it and what the archivist training had told me to do. The shoebox had been with me at the Baltimore apartment since the day I had found it. I had carried it back from the house in the specific form of the thing that required the being with rather than the leaving behind. I had been looking at it across the first days and had been asking the specific question that the archivist asks when they encounter a collection of unknown extent and organization. What is the arrangement and how was it created? The arrangement had been clear. The numbered order, the chronological order of the years on the backs. The creator had been my mother. The purpose of the arrangement had been, I had understood immediately, the reading in order. She had not written the year the letter had been created on the front. She had written the number. She had wanted the reading to happen in the order of my life, from the first year to the 35th, in the order she had been writing them. The arrangement had been the instruction. I had followed the instruction. I had opened letter 1 first. The first letter had been dated in March 1991, which was the March of the year of my birth, which would have made me approximately 2 weeks old when she had written it. The handwriting had been her handwriting in the specific form of her early 30s, the specific quality of the handwriting that has not yet settled into the form it would become by the time I had known it. I had recognized the handwriting as hers, and had also recognized that it was a younger form of hers, the handwriting of a woman in the first weeks of being a mother. She had written, "I am writing this to you on the 14th day of your life." She had written, "You do not yet know what day it is, or what a letter is, or what it means that someone has written something to you." She had written, "I want to write to you now before you know anything, so that you will have the record of the person I was before you knew me." She had written, "I'm 32 years old, and I have been your mother for 14 days, and I understand nothing about what that means yet." She had written, "I hope by the time you read this you know more about it than I do." I want to say something about the archival science parallel that had been in me from the moment I had read the first letter, and about what the professional framework had given me for the experience of reading the collection. In archival science, the principle of provenance is the foundational principle, the understanding that the context of the creation and the creator are inseparable from the meaning of the material. You cannot understand what a document means without understanding who created it, when, and why. The document removed from its context of creation is less meaningful than the document received in its full provenance. My mother had created these letters with extraordinary provenance information. Each letter was dated, numbered, and placed in the sequence of the collection in the exact form that provided the full context for reading. She had understood, either by instinct or by the teacher's knowledge of how information needs to be organized to be received, that the provenance was the meaning. The letter from when I had been a week old meant something specific because of when it had been written. The letter from when I had been 16 meant something different because of when that letter had been written. Both were part of the same collection, and both derived their specific meaning from the provenance. The collection was what the individual letters could not have been alone. She had given me the collection. I had been reading the letters in the evenings after work, one per evening, in the order she had created, across 35 evenings. Not because I was rationing them. I had understood from the first that rationing them was the right form. The collection was meant to be read in the order of a life, not consumed at once. I had been reading them one at a time and had been sitting with each one for the evening it was allocated before moving to the next. The letters from the early years, the ones from when I had been an infant and a toddler and a small child, had been her letters to the person she was imagining I would be, written with the specific quality of the imagining. Not the person I had turned out to be, but the person she had been imagining when she had been writing to me in the years before I had been old enough to be the person she was addressing. She had been writing to the imagined Simone. The letters from the middle years had been the letters that addressed the actual Simone she had been watching develop. Both had been hers. Both had been to me. The imagined and the actual had been in the same collection. I want to say something about the letter from year 16, and about what that letter had contained and about what the reading of it had produced in me. She had written the year 16 letter in March of the year I had been 16. I had been 16 in that year. I had been a specific 16-year-old with a specific life and specific difficulties, and she had been watching that specific 16-year-old and had been writing to her in the March of that year. She had written, "I am writing to the 16-year-old you are today." She had written about specific things she had observed that year. The form of me at 16 that she had been seeing from the position of the parent watching the child who was becoming the person. She had written about things I had done and things I had said, and the specific quality of the person I had been at 16 in the form that a parent who has been paying close attention can render in writing. She had written, "I want you to know that I see you at 16, and I believe in the person you are going to become from the 16-year-old I'm watching." She had written specific things about what she had seen. I had been reading the letter from year 16 and had been receiving what my mother had seen in me when I had been 16 and had not known she was seeing it, and had been receiving it 21 years later, as the person I had become from the 16-year-old she had been watching. The letter had closed the 21-year gap. The gap had been in the letter. The letter had held it. I want to say something about the letters from the years I had not been in good form with my mother, the years of the specific difficulty that the late teens and early 20s produce between parents and adult children who are navigating the specific forms of the independence and the establishing of the self. There had been specific years in my 20s when the relationship had been in the friction form rather than the warm form. Those years' letters had been in the collection too. She had not softened the letters from those years. She had written what she had been seeing and feeling in the years she had been writing, and the years of the friction had produced the letters of the friction. Not the angry form, the specific form of the parent who is writing honestly about what the year had been while also being in the relationship with the 22-year-old or the 24-year-old who had been producing the friction. I had been reading the year 22 letter and the year 24 letter and had been in the form of the person who was receiving honest account of what the friction had looked like from the other side. She had not been harsh. She had been honest. The honesty had been the form of the collection's integrity. An archivist does not destroy the materials that are difficult. The difficult materials are part of the record. She had kept the difficult years in the record. I want to say something about the letter from year 33 and about what that letter had contained and about why I had understood, on the evening I had read it, that the collection had been built with the specific forward knowledge that I was an archivist. She had written the year 33 letter in March of the year I had been 33. She had said, "I want to tell you something about this collection," she had said. "I have been writing these letters for 33 years, and I have been thinking for 33 years about who was going to read them and when and in what form." She had said, "I decided early on that you would read them after I was gone." She had said, "I made this decision not because I wanted the reading to be a grief experience, but because I understood that the reading would require a distance that the living alongside form would not allow." She had said, "A collection is most readable when the reader is not inside the life it documents." She had said, "You know this." She had said, "You are an archivist." She had said, "I have been watching you do this work for 9 years, and I understand that the distance of the archive is the condition that allows the full reading." She had said, "I am giving you the archive of me." She had said, "The distance of my being gone will allow you to read it in the full form rather than the alongside form." She had been right. The distance had been the condition. She had known it would be. She had built the collection for the archive form. She had known her archivist daughter would understand the archive form. I had called my aunt after the evening of the year 33 letter. My aunt is my mother's younger sister, a woman named Patricia, who had been present across the full span of my life and who had been with me at the house on the day of the finding. She had said, "I want to tell you something about the letters." I had said, "Tell me." She had said, "I knew about the letters." I had said, "How long?" She had said, "From the beginning." She had said, "She called me on the night after your birth and told me she was going to write you a letter every birthday." She had said, "She asked me to keep the secret." She had said, "I have been keeping the secret for 35 years." I had said, "Did you read them?" She had said, "No." She had said, "They were yours." She had said, "I would not read what was yours." She had been quiet. She had said, she talked about the letters every March. She had said, every year she would call me after she had written the letter and would tell me something about what she had written. She had said, not the content. She had said, something about the year and about what she had been thinking. She had said, every March for 35 years. She had been quiet. She had said, "I want to tell you something about the 35 years." She had said, "The letters were your mother's way of being in conversation with you even in the years when she did not have the direct form." She had said, "The letters were her form." She had said, "You have her form now." I had said yes. She had said yes. I want to say something about the letter from year 35. The last letter. The letter written in the March of the year she had died, and about what it had contained, and about the specific form of the reading of the last letter in a collection. In archival processing, the last item in a collection has a specific significance. It is the place where the creator's work ends, the point at which the collection becomes complete in the form it will always be in. The last item in a collection carries the weight of the ending, not only its own meaning, but the meaning of being the end of the record. She had written the year 35 letter in the March of the year of her death, which had been the February death. She had been ill in February and had died in February, and had been alive in March when she had written the letter and had died, as I calculated the dates, approximately 3 weeks after she had written it. The last letter had been written 3 weeks before her death. She had written it knowing, I understood from the content, that it was the last one she would write. She had written, I have been writing these letters for 35 years, and I understand this is the last one. She had written, not because I am certain of anything, but because I am in the form of the person who understands the collection is reaching its completion. She had written, I want to tell you what the 35 years of the writing have given me. She had written a full account of what the writing had been for her. I had been reading the last letter in the collection in the form that the last letter requires. The full receiving of the final document in the full context of the 34 that had come before it. She had written in the last letter that the 35 years of the writing had been the form of the conversation with me that the living alongside had not always been able to be. She had written, there were years when I could not tell you what I was seeing and thinking and feeling about you and about our relationship, because the directness would have required a form of the relationship we did not have yet. She had written, the letters were the form I could tell you in. She had written, not to say it behind your back, the letters were always yours, always waiting for you, always for your reading, rather than for my saying. She had written, I was not keeping them from you. She had written, I was keeping them for you. She had written, the keeping for is the form of the love that has the patience for the right time. She had written, I have had the patience for 35 years. She had written, I am giving you the full collection now. She had written this in the March of the year she died at 3 weeks before the death, and she had put the letter in the envelope and had sealed it, and had written 35 on the front and 2025 on the back, and had placed it on top of the other 34 in the shoebox under her bed, where it had waited for me to find it 12 days after her February death. I want to say something about what the reading of the full collection, all 35 evenings of it, had given me, and about what the full collection had produced in the form of the understanding of who my mother had been. In archival description, we say that a collection is understood in 2 ways. At the box level, which is the general understanding of what the collection contains, and at the folder level, which is the specific item-by-item understanding of the individual documents within the collection. The box-level understanding tells you the scope. The folder-level understanding tells you the content. I had had the box-level understanding of my mother for 35 years, the scope of her life, the general form of her as a person, the broad understanding of who she was that the living alongside produces. The 35 evenings of the letters had given me the folder-level understanding, the specific item-by-item knowledge of what she had been thinking and observing and feeling in each year of my life, the specific rendering of the year-by-year form of her love and her attention, and her specific observation of who I was becoming. The folder-level understanding was richer and more specific than the box level alone. The collection had been the folder-level understanding of my mother in the form she had been building for 35 years so that I would have it. I had it now. The folder-level understanding of my mother was mine. In the months since the reading, I had been in the form of the person who has processed a significant collection and who has the full finding aid in hand, and who is now in the relationship with the collection as the understood thing rather than the unknown thing. The collection had been unknown for 35 years. The 12-day wait between the death and the finding had been the last interval of the unknown. The 35 evenings had been the processing. The processing had produced the understanding. I had been in the understanding since the last evening. The understanding had been the form of the full knowledge of my mother that the collection had been built to give me. She had built it across 35 years. The building had been hers. The giving had been hers. The receiving had been mine. The full receiving had required the 35 evenings in the order she had created, and the specific form of the archive, the dead mother, the found shoebox, the numbered envelopes, that she had said in the year 33 letter was the condition for the full reading. The condition had arrived. The reading had happened in the full form. I had the full collection. I had my mother in the full form she had been building for 35 years to give me. I want to say something about a specific conversation I had with Patricia, my aunt, in the month after the reading, and about what she had told me about the specific March rituals across the 35 years. She had said, "I want to tell you what the March calls were like." She had said, every March she would call me after she had written the letter and had sealed it and had put it in the box. She had said, the call was not long, she had said. The call was the form of the closing of the year's letter. She had said, she would say, I wrote the letter. She had said, and I would say, what did you write about? She had said, and she would tell me something. She had said, not the words of the letter. She had said, the thing she had been thinking that year. She had said, for 35 years I received the annual something she had been thinking. She had been quiet. She had said, I want to tell you what the something she had been thinking was across the years. She had said, it was always something about you and something about who she was in relation to you and something about what she hoped. She had said, not the performed hope. She had said, the specific hope. She had said, the hope for the specific person she was watching. I had been receiving this from Patricia and understanding that the collection had been processed every year in the form of the Patricia call. The finding aid had been built one March phone call at a time across 35 years. Patricia had been the co-archivist. Patricia had been holding the finding aid in the form of the phone calls for 35 years. The finding aid had been alive the whole time. It had been in Patricia. I had asked Patricia to tell me what the finding aid contained. She had told me every March phone call she could remember. The telling had taken 3 hours. I want to say something about the way I have been in my professional work since the reading of the collection and about what the personal experience of being the researcher rather than the archivist has given me for the work I do. I had spent 9 years on the archivist side of the reference desk, the person who processes the collection and creates the finding aid and provides the conditions in which the researcher can do the research. I had understood the researcher's experience conceptually. I had not fully understood it experientially until the 35 evenings. The researcher's experience of reading a collection is the experience of receiving a life in the form the archivist has organized it in, the specific form of the understanding that builds from the context and the structure and the arrangement that the archivist has made possible. My mother had been the archivist of her own collection. I had been the researcher. The experience of being the researcher for 35 evenings had given me a form of the understanding of the researcher that the 9 years of being the archivist had not fully given me. I had been at the reference desk since the reading in the form of the archivist who has been the researcher. The difference in the understanding was real. The work had been better since the reading. The better was the gift of the reading. She had given me the better in the form of the shoebox under her bed. I want to say something about what the last line of the last letter had been and about why I have been thinking about the last line since the evening I read it. She had written, at the end of the year, 35 letter. I want to say one thing before I close this final letter and put it in the box. She had written, I have been writing to you for 35 years, and I have been, in every letter, writing to the version of you I was seeing in that year. She had written, in every letter I was writing to the Simone of that year. She had written, but I am also aware that you are reading these letters all at once, all 35 versions of you in the same person. She had written, you are reading them as the Simone who contains all of the previous Simones, the 14-day-old, and the 7-year-old, and the 16-year-old, and the 22-year-old, and the 33-year-old, and the 35-year-old who is reading this. She had written, I have been writing to each of those people across 35 years. She had written, you are the person all of those letters were addressed to. She had written, I want you to know that I have loved every version of you that I have been writing to, and I have been keeping them all safe in the box and giving them all to you now. She had written, you have all of your versions now. She had written, they were always yours. The last line of the last letter had been, they were always yours. The collection had been always mine. She had been keeping it for me for 35 years. I had it now. It was mine. I have read the collection twice since the first 35 evenings. The second reading had been different from the first in the specific form that the second reading of a collection always is. The first reading is the discovery. The second reading is the understanding. In the first reading, you are building the context. In the second reading, you are in the context and you can see what the context allows you to see. The second reading of the letters had been richer than the first because I had the full collection as the context for each individual letter. The year 1 letter was different in the second reading because I had read the year 35 letter and knew the full arc. The year 22 letter was different because I had the year 23 and the year 24 and the year 25 letters as the context for understanding what the year 22 had been in the full trajectory. The collection had gained depth in the second reading. She had built the collection for multiple readings. She had known the archivist's daughter would read it more than once. She had built it for the archivist who would return. I had returned. I would return again. The collection would be there. The collection would always be there. She had made it for the returning. The returning was mine to do. I would do it. I want to say something about what the collection has given me, that the 35 years of the living alongside had not fully given in about what the fuller picture has done to the understanding of the living alongside form. The living alongside form had been real and warm and good. 35 years of my mother in the form of the present parent, the science teacher, the organized presence, the warm family dinners and the school pickups, and the specific form of being the child of the person who organized themselves around the teaching and the family. That form had been the form I had known. The collection had given me the interior of that form, the specific thoughts and observations and feelings that had been present in the same years I had been in the living alongside form and that the living alongside form had not directly conveyed. The interior and the exterior had been the same life. I had had the exterior form for 35 years. The collection had given me the interior. The exterior and interior together were the fuller form of who she had been. She had been the exterior and interior person the whole time. I had received the exterior. The collection had given me the interior. Both together were the full form of my mother. The full form was what she had built the collection to give me. The full form was mine now. The full form was her. The receiving of the full form was the keeping of her in the full form. I had her in the full form. The full form was good. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story connected with something real in your life, write it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you have been thinking about writing something down for someone you love, a letter, a journal, any form of the keeping of the interior, I want to say something clearly before you go. Write it down. Keep it somewhere they will find it. Date it. Number it. There are many. Give them the context they will need to receive it in the full form. You do not have to give it now. The giving can be the leaving for after if the after is the right form. But write it. The writing is the building of the collection. The collection is the gift. The gift is the full form of who you are, given to the person who loves you in the form that allows the full receiving. Start the collection. The starting is available right now. The now is the right time to start. I want to say something about the 12 days between my mother's death and the finding of the shoebox, and about what the 12 days had been in the form they had been. The death had been in February, which had been the form that the specific combination of her conditions had been moving toward across the previous year, with the specific trajectory that the medical team had been honest about. I had been in Baltimore and had been in the form of the person who knows the thing is coming and who has been in the form of the preparing alongside the hoping that the preparing was unnecessary. The death had come in February on a Tuesday morning, and I had been in Baltimore and had come to the house in Annapolis the following day. The 12 days from the arrival at the house to the finding of the shoebox had been the 12 days of the specific form of the post-death house time, the family and the neighbors, and the forms that a death produces in the practical sense. My Aunt Patricia had been with me for much of the 12 days. We had been in the house in the form of the two people who are working through the house together and who are doing the work of the going through in the specific form that requires the attention and the care and the asking of each object what it had been. The shoebox had been waiting under the bed for the 12th day. The 12th day had been the day Patricia and I had gotten to the bedroom. The bedroom had been last. She had organized the house such that the bedroom would be last. The bedroom had been where the collection had been waiting. I want to say something about the letters from the very early years, the ones from years 2 through 7, the years of the early childhood that I had no direct memory of, and that the letters had given me in the form of my mother's account of those years. She had written to the child she had been watching in those years, the toddler, the small child, the child who had been developing in the specific forms that children develop in across the first years of consciousness. She had written about specific things she had observed, the way I had walked at 2, and the way I had asked questions at 4, and the specific quality of the attention I had brought to things when I had been 6. She had been writing to me in those years about what she had been seeing as the person who was watching me most closely. I had not remembered those years. I had received the account of those years from the letters. The account had been detailed and warm and specific, not the general account of the child's early years, but the specific rendering of the specific child my mother had been watching. The specificity had been the thing. She had not been writing general letters about general children. She had been writing specific letters about the specific person she had been watching, who had been me. The specificity had made the letters feel like the primary source record, the dated, authored, specific account of the things that had been there in the years I had no memory of. She had remembered for me. She had kept the record. I want to say something about the archival principles that my mother had been applying, whether consciously or by the instinct of the science teacher who understood how information needed to be organized across the 35 years of the collection's creation. The principle of original order is the archival principle that the arrangement created by the record creator should be preserved. The order that the creator gave to the materials should not be disturbed because the original order reflects the creator's understanding of the relationship among the materials. My mother had created the original order, the numbered sequence, the chronological arrangement, the specific form in which she had organized the collection for the reading. I had preserved the original order by reading in the sequence she had created. The preservation of the original order had been the preservation of her intention. She had intended the reading to be in the order of a life, and I had honored the intention by reading in that order. The original order had been the finding aid. The finding aid had been embedded in the numbering system. The numbering system had been on the front of the envelopes. She had been an excellent record creator. She had given me an excellent collection. I had been the researcher. The researcher and the collection had been right for each other. I want to say something about a specific letter from year 28 that had been the letter that had produced the most complex receiving of the full 35. I had been 28 in the year that letter had been written, which had been the year I had been in the specific form of the late 20s difficulty, the specific combination of the professional uncertainty and the personal uncertainty that the late 20s produces in the form it produces. The year 28 letter had been written by my mother in the year she had been watching me in that difficulty from the outside of it. She had written, "I am watching you be in the hard year, and I want to tell you what I see from the outside of the hard year." She had written, "From the outside, the hard year looks like the year that is forming you in the specific way that the hard years form people." She had written, "I do not want to minimize the hard from the inside." She had written, "I want to tell you that from the outside the hard has a direction, and the direction is toward something." She had written specific things about what she had been seeing in me in that year, the specific quality of the difficulty and the specific quality of the person who had been in the difficulty. She had written, "I see you getting through this in the form that the getting through produces the person on the other side." She had been quiet on the page. She had written, "I am proud of who you are in the hard year, not the who you will be, the who you are in it." I had read the year 28 letter 7 years after my mother had written it and had understood, from the distance of 7 years, that she had been right about the direction. I want to say something about a call I had with the head archivist at the Maryland State Archives, Dr. Chin, who had been my supervisor for 7 of my 9 years, and who had known me through the death and the finding of the collection. She had called me 2 months after the reading to ask how I was doing and had said, "I want to ask you something about the professional experience of it." I had said, "Ask." She had said, "You have been on the archivist side of the processing and describing work for 9 years." She had said, "What has it been like to be on the researcher side of the full collection?" I had been quiet for a moment. I had said, "It has been the most significant research experience I have had in 9 years of working with collections." She had said, "Tell me the most significant thing." I had been quiet for a long time. I had said, "The most significant thing was the experience of the context building." She had said, yes. I had said, in our processing work we build the context so the researcher can use it. She had said, yes. I had said, being the researcher in the context my mother built was the experience of receiving the work of the archivist from the other side. She had said, yes. She had said, and I had said, and the work of the archivist is the gift. She had been quiet. She had said, yes. She had said, I have been doing this work for 25 years, and I have always known that was true. She had said, I have not always had the form to say it. She had said, you just gave me the form. I had said, yes. She had said, your mother gave you the form. I had said, yes. She had said, your mother gave you the form. I had said, yes. She had said, yes. She had been quiet. She had said, the work of the archivist is the gift. I had said, yes, it is. I want to say something about a specific passage in the Year 10 letter that had been the passage I had returned to most often across the months of the reading and the rereading. She had been writing the Year 10 letter in the March that I had been 10 years old, which had been the March of the specific year of my childhood that I remembered as the year when I had first understood that the objects in the archives my mother had taken me to were the objects that someone had once held, and that the holding had been real. She had taken me to the Maryland State Archives on a school trip that year, and I had been in the reading room and had been looking at a document from the colonial period and had understood in the specific form that a 10-year-old understands something for the first time, that the document had been written by a person and that the person had been real and that the writing had been the specific act of the real person who was now gone, but whose writing was in the room with me. I had come home that day and had told my mother what I had understood. She had written about this in the Year 10 letter. She had written, you came home from the archives and you said, the people who wrote those papers were real people and their papers are still here. She had written, I want you to know I knew in that moment what you were going to do with your life. She had written, I had not known before that moment. She had written, you showed me. She had written, the 10-year-old in the reading room showed me the archivist. I had been reading the Year 10 letter and had been understanding that she had known who I was going to be from the moment I had understood what the archives were for. She had known since I had been 10. She had been keeping the knowledge in the letter since I had been 10. I want to say something about the final form of the collection as I have it now and about what I have done with the shoebox since the 35 evenings. I have kept the shoebox in the specific place that it belongs in my apartment, in the specific form of the object that is too significant for the shelf but too present for the storage form. It is on the dresser in the specific place where the significant objects go. The letters are back in the shoebox in the original order, numbered 1 through 35 with the years on the backs. The original order has been maintained. The collection is in the condition the creator left it in. I have added nothing to the collection and removed nothing from the collection. The collection is complete in the form she created it in. This is the standard of the archival care. Maintain the collection in the condition of the creator without alteration or addition. I have maintained it. The collection is there. The collection will always be there. Every time I open the shoebox, I will be returning to the collection in the original order and in the original form. The original form is hers. The maintaining of the original form is my form of the continuing to hold what she gave me. She gave me the collection. I am holding the collection in the form she created. The holding is the form of the receiving that continues after the reading. The receiving continues. The collection is there. She is there in the form she built for me. I will keep returning to it. The returning is mine to do. I want to say something about the Year 19 letter and about what it had contained and about the specific form of the receiving that letter had required. I had been 19 in the year she had written it, and had been in my first year of college, and had been in the specific form of the late teenager who was building the independent life, and who had been in the form of the late teenager building the independent life, not always in the best form of the relationship with the parent watching from the house in Annapolis. She had written the Year 19 letter with the honest account of what the year had been for her from the outside of the building the independent life that I had been doing. She had written, this year has been the year in which I have understood that the person you are becoming is not primarily organized around me. She had written, I want to tell you that I received this correctly. She had written, the person who is not primarily organized around the parent is the person who is correctly building the life available to them. She had written, I am proud of the not primarily organized around me form that you are in. She had written, not because I do not feel the not primarily organized around me. She had written, I feel it. She had written, and I receive it as the correct form. She had been quiet on the page. She had written, I want to say something about what it feels like to watch a person you love become primarily organized around their own life. She had written, it feels like exactly what it is. The person you've been watching grow up is now the size they are going to be. She had written, you are the size you are going to be now. She had written, I'm glad you are that size. I had been reading this at 35 years old and had been understanding that she had been doing the work of the generous reception, the reception of the thing that costs something and that is received as the right thing anyway, since I had been 19. The year 19 letter had been the record of the generous reception in the year it had been required. I want to say something about the conversation I had had with my colleague Elena, who had been working in the archival science field for 15 years, and who had the specific form of the long-practiced wisdom that the years produce. I had told her about the collection in the form available to me in a professional conversation, the description of the organizational structure, the provenance, the specific archival qualities of the collection my mother had created. Elena had listened. She had said, I want to tell you something about what your mother created. She had said, she created a retention schedule for her own interior life. She had said, the retention schedule is the plan for what records you keep, for how long, and in what form. She had said, your mother decided to keep one record per year for the full span of your life in the sealed envelope form. She had said, that is a retention schedule. She had said, the retention schedule reflected a specific judgment about what was worth keeping and for how long and in what form. She had been quiet. She had said, the judgment embedded in your mother's retention schedule was, everything I observe and feel and think about my daughter for the full span of her life is worth keeping. She had said, every year. She had said, in the sealed form. She had said, for the full span. She had been quiet. She had said, that is the retention schedule of a person who has judged that the record of the love is worth keeping in perpetuity. She had said, she kept it in perpetuity. She had said, you have the perpetual record. I had said, yes. She had said, the perpetual record is yours to maintain now. I had said, yes. She had said, yes. She had said, keep it well. I had said, yes. She had said, yes, I would. I want to say something about a specific evening in April, 6 weeks after the last reading of the collection, when I had gone back to the shoebox for the first time since the 35th evening. I had not opened any letter. I had simply opened the shoebox and had looked at the envelopes in the original order and had been in the form of the archivist checking on the condition of the collection. The envelopes had been in their order. The collection had been in its condition. I had been with the collection in the condition checking form for a few minutes and had then closed the shoebox and had put it back on the dresser. The act of the closing and the returning to the dresser had been the specific form of the archival care. The collection returned to its housing after the consultation. The housing returned to its place. The preservation of the condition for the next consultation. I had been doing the archival care on my mother's collection in my own apartment in April. The archival care had been the form of the continuing to hold. The continuing to hold had been the form of the love available to me in the after the reading form. She had held the collection for me for 35 years. I was holding it now in the form available to the person who has received the collection and who is now its custodian. The custodian's work is the care. The care is the form. The form was the continuing. I was continuing. I would continue. I want to say something about the letter from year 8, the year I had been 8 years old, which had been the year I had first asked my mother about death in the specific form that 8-year-olds ask about death when they have begun to understand that the people they love will die. She had written about this in the year 8 letter. She had written, you asked me this year what happens after people die. She had written, I told you what I believe and I want to tell you again now when you are reading this. She had written, I believe that the people who loved you do not stop being present to you after they die. She had written, I believe the present changes its form, but the presence is real. She had written, "I believe this, and I also want to tell you that I have built the evidence for it." She had written this in the year she had been the parent of an 8-year-old, when the shoebox had been 3 years old and had contained 3 letters. She had written, "I am building the evidence now." She had written, "The letters are the evidence." She had written, "When I am gone, the letters will be the form of the presence that continues." She had written this at my mother's age of 43. I had been reading the year 8 letter at 35, with the shoebox full and the 35 years of the evidence in the box, and my mother gone in February. She had built the evidence for 27 more years after writing about the building. The evidence was in the box. The letters were the form of the presence. The presence was real. She had built the evidence. The evidence was the box. I had the box. I had the evidence. I had the presence. I want to say something about a March that had come after the collection had been read. The March of the year after my mother's death, which had been the first March without the writing of the letter that had not happened for 35 years. I had been in Baltimore in March and had understood that the March had arrived and that she was not going to write the letter. Not a grief so much as the specific form of the awareness of the absence. The March had always been the letter-writing month, and now it was the first March that was not. I had been thinking about this and had taken the shoebox out and had opened the year 35 letter and had read the last letter again. The letter from the March of the year before, the letter she had written 3 weeks before her death. I had read it in the March of the year after in the form of the rereading. The last letter had been the form of the presence for the March that had not had the letter. I had read it. I had put it back in the envelope. I had put the shoebox back on the dresser. She had written the last letter knowing it was the last letter. She had written it well. It had held. The March had been the March. The letter had been there. The presence had been there in the form it had been in. The form had held. I want to say something about what the collection had given me for my understanding of the archival work, and about what the personal experience had added to the professional understanding that the 9 years of the professional work had not fully given. In archival science, we speak about the significance of the collection, the specific combination of the evidential value, what the collection tells us about the function and work of the creating entity, and the informational value, what the collection tells us about people, places, and subjects. The evidential value of my mother's collection was the account of her function as a parent, the evidence of what it was to be my mother across 35 years, the specific record of the loving and the watching and the worrying and the hoping that the parenting function had produced. The informational value was the account of who I had been across 35 years in the form my mother's observation had rendered, the record of my life as it had been seen from the outside. Both values had been present in the same collection. Both had been the value she had created when she had written each year's letter and sealed it and put it in the box. She had not used the archival language. She had created the archival values by the act of the creation. The creation of the letter had been the archival act. The letter had been the archival record. The box had been the repository. She had been the record creator. I had been the researcher. The collection had connected us across the full span and across the death. The collection was still connecting us. The archival connection was the form of the continuing presence. The continuing presence was the form. The form was real. I want to say something about what it means that this is the 100th story in this series, and about why I wanted this particular story to be the one. In archives, every 100 items is a milestone in the processing. The archivist who reaches the 100th folder in a collection has processed a significant portion of the work and has arrived at the point where the collection has begun to reveal its full shape. The 100-item mark is the mark at which the pattern becomes visible. I have been telling these stories for this series across a significant span, and the 100th has been the one I wanted to be the story of the collection, the story of the keeping for, the story of the finding aid, the story of the patience for the right form of the giving. My mother kept 35 letters for 35 years. The series has kept 100 stories across the time of its telling. Both are collections. Both are organized for the reader who will come to them. Both are the record of the people and the love in the form the Creator made available. The collection is the form the love takes when the love has the patience for the building. The building takes the time it takes. The collection is the gift. The gift is the form. The form is what the love was always working toward. I am glad you've been with me for the 100 stories. The stories have been the form. You have been the researcher. The collection was for you. I want to say something about the specific quality of the reading of the collection that has been with me since the 35th evening, and that has not left. The reading produced the specific form of the knowing that the archivist calls the contextual understanding, not only the knowledge of the individual items, but the knowledge of the whole that the individual items comprise. I had the contextual understanding of my mother now. The contextual understanding was the fullest form of the knowing available to me from the archive she had created. She had known this was the fullest form available. She had built the collection for the fullest form. The fullest form was in the box. The box was on the dresser. The dresser was in the apartment. The apartment was in Baltimore. The collection was there. It was always going to be there now. The knowing was real. The knowing was mine. The knowing was hers in the giving of it and mine in the receiving. Both the giving and the receiving had been the form of the love. Both had been 35 years in the building. Both had arrived at the same place at the same time. The shoebox, the 12th day, the 35 evenings, the last letter in March, the full collection in hand. I had the full collection. The collection was hers. The collection was mine. Both were true. The both was the form. The form was the love. The love was real. I want to say one final thing about the collection and about why I became an archivist and about what my mother had understood about that before I had understood it myself. She had written in the year 10 letter about the day at the Maryland State Archives when I had been 10 and had understood that the people who wrote the documents had been real. She had written, "I knew in that moment what you were going to do with your life." She had known at 10. She had been building the collection since 1. She had been building a collection for the person she was going to become, not only the person I was at each year, the person who would receive the collection, the archivist. She had been building for the archivist for 35 years. The archivist had been the person who would receive the collection in the form the collection required. The collection required the archivist. The archivist had been built partly from watching the collection be built. The collection and the archivist had been in conversation across the full span. The collection had shaped the archivist. The archivist would care for the collection. Both had been the love. Both had been her gift. Both had been the form the love had taken across the full 35 years. She had given me the work and the collection. Both were hers. Both were mine.